Understanding Judaism and Zionism, thanks to Israel Shahak's book, Jewish History, Jewish Religion. Social aspects of dispensations. Two social features of these and many similar practices deserve special mention. First, a dominant feature of this system of dispensations and of classical Judaism, inasmuch as it is based on them, is deception. Deception primarily of God, if this word can be used for an imaginary being so easily deceived by the rabbis who consider themselves cleverer than him. No greater contrast can be conceived than that between the God of the Bible, particularly of the greater prophets, and of the God of classical Judaism. The latter is more like the early Roman Jupiter, who was likewise bamboozled by his worshippers, or the gods described in Fraser's Golden Bowl. From the ethical point of view, classical Judaism represents a process of degeneration which is still going on, and this degeneration into a tribal collection of empty rituals and magic superstitions has very important social and political consequences. For it must be remembered that it is precisely the superstitions of classical Judaism which have the greatest hold on the Jewish masses, rather than those parts of the Bible or even the Talmud which are of real religious and ethical value. The same can be observed also in other religions which are now undergoing revival. What is popularly regarded as the most holy and solemn occasion of the Jewish liturgical year, attended even by very many Jews who are otherwise far from religion, it is the Kol Nidrei prayer on the eve of Yom Kippur, a chanting of a particularly absurd and deceptive dispensation, by which all private vows made to God in the following year are declared in advance to be null and void. Note: another extremely important ritual is the blowing of a ram's horn on Rosh Hashanah, whose purpose is to confuse Satan. End of note. Or, in the area of personal religion, the Kaddish prayer, said on days of mourning by sons for their parents, in order to elevate their departed souls to paradise, a recitation of an Aramaic text incomprehensible to the great majority. Quite obviously, the popular regard given to these, the most superstitious parts of the Jewish religion, is not given to its better parts. Together with the deception of God goes the deception of other Jews, mainly in the interest of the Jewish ruling class. It is characteristic that no dispensations were allowed in the specific interest of the Jewish poor. For example, Jews who were starving but not actually on the point of death were never allowed by their rabbis, who did not often go hungry themselves, to eat any sort of forbidden food, though kosher food is usually more expensive. The second dominant feature of the dispensations is that they are in large part obviously motivated by the spirit of profit. And it is this combination of hypocrisy and the profit motive which increasingly dominated classical Judaism. In Israel, where the process goes on, this is dimly perceived by popular opinion, despite all the official brainwashing promoted by the education system and the media. The religious establishment, the rabbis and the religious parties, and by association to some extent, the Orthodox community as a whole, are quite unpopular in Israel. One of the most important reasons for this is precisely their reputation for duplicity and venality. Of course, popular opinion, which may often be prejudiced, is not the same thing as social analysis. But in this particular case, it is actually true that the Jewish religious establishment does have a strong tendency to chicanery and graft due to the corrupting influence of the Orthodox Jewish religion. Because in general social life, religion is only one of the social influences, its effect on the mass of believers is not nearly so great as on the rabbis and leaders of the religious parties. Those religious Jews in Israel who are honest, as the majority of them undoubtedly are so not because of the influence of their religion and rabbis, but in spite of it. On the other hand, in those few areas of public life in Israel, which are wholly dominated by religious circles, the level of chicanery, venality and corruption is notorious, far surpassing the average level tolerated by general, non-religious Israeli society. In chapter 4, we shall see how the dominance of the profit motive in classical Judaism is connected with the structure of Jewish society and its articulation with the general society in the midst of which Jews lived in the classical period. Here, I merely want to observe that the profit motive is not characteristic of Judaism in all periods of its history. Only the Platonist confusion, which seeks for the metaphysical timeless essence of Judaism, instead of looking at the historical changes in Jewish society, has obscured this fact. And this confusion has been greatly encouraged by Zionism in its reliance on historical rights are historically derived from the Bible. Thus, apologists of Judaism claim, quite correctly, that the Bible is hostile to the profit motive, while the Talmud is indifferent to it. But this was caused by the very different social conditions in which they were composed. As was pointed out above, the Talmud was composed in two well-defined areas in a period when the Jews living there constituted a society based on agriculture and consisting mainly of peasants, very different indeed from the society of classical Judaism. In chapter 5, we shall deal in detail with the hostile attitudes and deceptions practiced by classical Judaism against non-Jews. But more important as a social feature is the profit-motivated deception practiced by the rich Jews against poor fellow Jews, such as the dispensation concerning interest on loans. Here, I must say, in spite of my opposition to Marxism, both in philosophy and as a social theory, that Marx was quite right when, in his two articles about Judaism, he characterized it as dominated by profit-seeking. Provided this is limited to Judaism as he knew it, that is, to classical Judaism, which in his youth had already entered the period of its dissolution. True, he stated this arbitrarily, historically, and without proof. Obviously, he came to his conclusion by intuition. But his intuition in this case, and with the proper historical limitation, was right.